Nothing contained in this videocast is intended to encourage the use of illegal substances. This videocast represents only the opinions of the host and their guests and should not be taken as medical or legal advice. In no way does listening, reading, corresponding, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient or legal relationship. The content here is intended to share thoughts and opinions to foster constructive discussion. Please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions concerning cannabis. The views expressed by hosts and guests on this videocast are not necessarily the views of Global Cannabis Times or any other company with which the hosts and guests are associated.
Welcome to an episode of Going Global, a Global Cannabis Times podcast with myself, Sibusiso Xaba, and Denmar Grieving as hosts for today's exciting episode. Today, we're honored to be joined by the Gauteng Provincial Government, and we are here to discuss and unlock the province's cannabis strategy as well as South Africa's cannabis future, which has been a strong focus in terms of Africa's development within the space. Just a brief introduction on myself. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Africa Cannabis Advisory Group, as well as the CEO of Global Go Africa. And we're very, very excited about deep diving into South Africa's nascent but explosive cannabis industry. I'm going to hand over very briefly to my co-host for today, Denmar, who's going to give a bit of an intro on herself before we formally introduce our special guest for today and get going on a very exciting discussion.
Thanks, Sibs. Hi to our listeners. My name is Denmar Grieving. I'm currently the cannabis lead for Schindler's Side Attorneys, the firm that helped to legalize cannabis recreationally in South Africa. I'm also a litigation and commercial attorney and admitted attorney of the High Court of South Africa. I'm very excited to be here tonight with our guest, Motlatjo Makaepea, and I really am looking forward to this conversation tonight.
Excellent. So our guest today is someone who is very central to Gauteng Province and the economic strategy and development of the province, with a special focus on agri-processing and economic services. We're very honored today to be joined by the Chief Director of Agri-Processing and Economic Services for Gauteng Province, Mr. Motlatjo Makaepea, who is going to be giving us a lowdown on what's going on in Gauteng and in South Africa when it comes to the cannabis industry. So please join us in welcoming Motlatjo to this exciting discussion.
Motlatjo, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'll start with a very easy question. Just can you tell us a bit more about yourself? Where did you grow up and how do you find yourself in the role of Chief Director of Agroprocessing and Economic Services in Gauteng?
Thank you very much. Good evening to Denmar. Good evening, Sibu. I come from the north part of South Africa, Limpopo Province. And from an academic background, I studied agronomy from the university in the Limpopo Province. And then I went to University of Pretoria, where I then pursued entomology as well as plant pathology. And I went over to University of Ireland, University College Dublin, where I did my master's there. And I also then did some business studies locally with that university. I joined Gauteng Department of Agriculture from as early as 2001 after teaching at University of Limpopo and also supervising research students in the agriculture space. And I've been with the Provincial Department of Agriculture from that 2001 up to now. I've also worked at the National Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development for some time. So I've got a bit of a broad experience in the whole agri-food space from cultivation and up to agro-processing, as well as the economic side of the agribusiness side or the trading of food across. So that's a bit my experience and how I came to be working on the cannabis. You know, as a province, we wanted to focus on the processing side of cannabis, and that's why it landed on the person who has the role of agro-processing and marketing services. That's in short my background, Denmar.
Wow, I think a very impressive career and extremely broad in terms of touch points in government, some private sector, education, and so forth. So I think that really is very impressive. And one really key question that a lot of our international audience will be curious about is, Gauteng Province. So I think people know a lot about South Africa and they see the headlines, but not as many deep dive into what Gauteng Province looks like, what it represents. So could you tell us a little bit more about how Gauteng Province fits into the South African economic landscape, as well as why it's such an important province for South Africa and the African continent.
Okay, thanks. So Gauteng, it's geographically the smallest province of the 9 provinces of South Africa. It occupies 1.4% or so of the South African geographical surface area. But it's then the economic hub of the country. You've got your largest city, you've got the capital city, which is Pretoria in the province. You also have your economic hub of the country, which is Johannesburg within Gauteng. Over and above, you also have a lot of institutions. You've got institutions of research that are clustered here in Gauteng. You also have your industrial capacity that is also clustered in Gauteng. So it is the economic powerhouse. And also from your trade point of view as well, you've got your trading hub in the form of your Johannesburg Securities Exchange situated in Gauteng. So it is where it's happening. It's where your economic deals are happening. It's where the growth of the economy is really getting to move the country forward. When it's happening in Gauteng, that gets to catapult the country to move forward. In terms of the economic size, Gauteng as a province is the 4th largest economy in the African continent. And that's why it's such a very important province, not only to the country of South Africa, but to the continent at large.
That's very understandable. And is there any types of economic growth initiatives that the province itself has undertook to help South Africa during this challenging economic time?
Yes, absolutely. Especially with COVID. When COVID hit, the province came up with an economic response plan. And that response plan was really to ensure that it caters for assisting particularly the small enterprise to be able to get going and not to lose their businesses. So it really assisted to make sure that all the enterprises that have been supported are actually able to sustain and not necessarily lay off all their employees. So over and above the economic response plan that was responding to COVID, we have a Gauteng Growing Together strategy, which is our growth and development strategy for the province. And that strategy identifies 10 sectors that are high growing sectors. And of significant importance is that cannabis is one of the 10 sectors that has been identified in the Growing Gauteng Together 2030 plan. We call it in short GGT 2030 plan. And it also identifies other sectors that are complementary. For example, your tourism sector, your food and beverage sector is one of the other sectors that are also identified. So all of those 10 sectors are very key in terms of growing and sustaining the economy of the province and creating the necessary jobs that we are actually looking for, and also serving as a vehicle for attracting the investments that we need as a country in order to be able to reindustrialize, to modernize our economy, and to ensure that we grow it and put it on an accelerated path of industrialization.
Fantastic. Now, South Africa has also now recently been in international headlines specifically for cannabis, as the country seems determined to be a global leader in the sector. Can you tell us about South Africa's cannabis industry and what spurred this focus on unlocking the cannabis industry specifically for economic growth?
Yeah, South Africa, there's been a lot of advocacy for legalizing the cannabis sector. And that really came forth with the Constitutional Court ruling of 2018, wherein the Constitutional Court legalized and allowed personal use for those that want to use cannabis for personal use to be allowed and have access to cannabis. And it also then mandated the relevant ministers through government to actually start putting the relevant regulations, legislative frameworks in place. And coming out of that, we then saw also in 2019, in the State of the Province address, cannabis actually now being mentioned as one of the sectors that needs to be given attention so that it can be industrialized and then be completely unlocked. We started actually seeing a paradigm shift where then the positive sides of cannabis were actually then coming out to the forth, and a lot of people who didn't really know those positive sides actually were really now coming forth and starting to embrace what is it that the potential of the sector or the potential of the plant itself. And we then in the province also in around 2019, 2020, our premier also then went further to then also specify the significance of cannabis in the province. So from that time, there has been a lot of work, including development of the National Master Plan for Cannabis, which is currently at the NETLEC. NETLEC is a platform where the government and labor and industry actually meet to actually debate and make sure that the policy that comes into place is actually encompassing of all those three pillars. So the National Master Plan is at the stage of NETLEC, and we anticipate that it will then be finalized. And we've also seen, following the Constitutional Court, the tabling of the Cannabis Private Purpose Bill, which would in a way really move forward towards unlocking particularly the commercialization for cannabis recreational market. So in short, I think those are some of the developments that the country has really been moving on to unlock the cannabis industry.
Thanks so much for that in-depth answer. And I think touching on some really key developments in the South African industry, I think there hasn't been a lot of focus, for example, on the roadmap towards a recreational industry in the space. And so I think some of the developments that we've seen in terms of inputs into the Cannabis for Private Purposes Bill have been very, very encouraging. So thanks for that great answer. So the next question is, with regards to Gauteng Province, the Premier, Mr. David Makhura, has been very outspoken about the province's goal to be the center of the cannabis industry, not only in South Africa, but extending into the continent. Can you outline what Gauteng Province's sort of vision or what the province's goals are when it comes to realizing the economic and social potential of cannabis?
Yeah, the Premier has pronounced in, I think from 2019, in State of Province Address, the significance of cannabis to the province. And he has actually outlined the fact that we would really like to position Gauteng as the hub or as the mecca of cannabis in Africa. What we then had to do was that we had gone out to develop a master plan, a provincial master plan. Obviously, we have spoken earlier on about the national master plan. Now, with regard to the provincial master plan, we wanted to identify what would be the competitive edge, what would position the province to be the leader of the sector in the country. And we then identified a number of pillars of the master plan, but I will just really want to speak about some of the key outcomes of those pillars. The first one, which is to create an enabling environment for the enterprises to set up in the country. And the first one was to ensure that we make access to finance or access to capital easier. That's all. The first pillar is really addressing the access to capital. Let me retrace back a little bit. The pillar on the strategy is the regulatory pillar, ensuring that the regulatory space is actually harnessed to encourage and be enabling for the sector to develop. And what we are doing as a province in this regard is to work with the national partners, with national departments to help unlock some of the issues that had been prohibiting particularly, for example, licensing, the participation of enterprises in the sector. So we have engaged our provincial minister, MEC, who has been engaging with national on this aspect, including requesting that there should be decentralization of certain processes. For example, those who are applying for hemp licenses have got to, initially the process was centralized for clearance, for police clearance, and now that has been decentralized. So our MEC has written for requesting determinations of assigning certain functions to provinces such that we can be able to accelerate access to licenses, especially when it comes to the hemp space. That's on the regulatory, but more importantly for the province, we are exploring a regulatory sandbox because we understand that the regulation framework for cannabis is still evolving. So we are looking at setting up a regulatory and getting Gauteng to be the regulatory sandbox, wherein some new regulatory parameters can be tested within the province, because we certainly want to maintain that leadership position and enable more setting up of the enterprises and a faster pace of industrialization. The second pillar that I wanted to then speak about was the pillar on access to finance, which we are setting up a fund that is there to assist the enterprises with our Gauteng Enterprise Propeller. So we would be having a specific cannabis fund that would be assisting the enterprise. And this fund is linked to other funds which are operating at nationals. We've got the Agroprocessing Support Scheme, which is a blended funding tool, wherein it's a combination of grant funds as well as loan funding, and the Agri-Industrialization Fund as well. So those are instruments that we will be making available to ensure that we support the enterprises that wants to set up a shop in the space. Then the third focal area is on aggregation, and the aggregation is to then link the dots between the cultivation and the market, because we've got a lot of small scale enterprises that would want to be included in the space of cannabis. And we have realized that there's a need for enabling that to happen. And we have looked at aggregation schemes as one of the focal points that we need to support to be able to connect the dots between cultivation along the value chain. And the aggregations will also be partners that would then participate in operating the hubs. We have got a plan to establish the hubs in the various districts of Gauteng. The southern district, which is called Sidibeng, and the western district are the priority areas for establishment of the cannabis hubs. So part of what the aggregators will then be doing is to provide incubation services, is also to provide and facilitation of access to inputs that may be required, linking to, for example, seed supply systems, and it's also to link to processing facilities, packaging, aggregation, and processing facilities. So we would, at the setting up the hub, we would then partner with existing facilities, then finance the infrastructure that is required for the hubs to then operate optimally and make sure that it's inclusive of growers. And capacity building will also be one of the focal points linked to incubation service that we expect that the hubs will be. And then the aspect of quality certification and quality assurance, which is the next focal point. We will also be then supporting the consortias and also through the hubs, the consortia in the southern part, the southern district, Sidibeng, to set up accredited laboratory in partners with the established industry players already that are in other provinces. And then we'll also be looking at setting up one just next to Pretoria with the existing partners there. So we would ensure that that is what will be addressed by this. And that also links to the support to the research and development, where we are funding the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research Agency to fund the product development of cannabis, and also to look at products that some of the small enterprises that have already been processing. There's a number that have already been doing, for example, food-infused products. Some have been doing so different kind of. So we have already approved a fund to the CSIR to be able to do that. And then the other program, which is very critical, is the special economic zones, which are your large industrial parks, which have got incentives to attract industrialists that can be able to do processing and export of the products. Because part of our strategy is also to be able to enable export of this. So we would not be able to industrialize if we cannot access export markets. And the special economic zones are critical instruments in this particular regard, and they provide a good number of incentives, including tax incentives. And there is 2 SEZs, the one in the southern district, which is called the Sidibeng Val SEZ, and the one in the western, which will be called the Western Agroprocessing SEZ. And lastly, next to the airport, we have got an industrial development zone, which we call OR Tambo, next to the OR Tambo International Airport. So the OR Tambo Industrial Development Zone, it's one area that we're strategically focusing to set up a trading hub or a trade platform, because part of positioning Gauteng to be the leader in cannabis is to ensure that we enable trading to take place, and obviously linked to our international airport. And we want to then set up a trading exchange, which you can liken to your, like the London Metals Exchange or your Minerals Exchange. And that would then be able to consolidate and be a vehicle that enable accelerated exports, and also identify markets, export market that can be sourced, and look at the stock available. So the data, the clearing, the traceability, we will link all of that to our cannabis trading platform or cannabis exchange that we would intend to set up at the OR Tambo Industrial Development Zone, which will also be an SEZ with the incentives of the SEZ that I'd already spoken to. In short, I think that's the high-level plans. I didn't want to go through pillar by pillar, because you've got then the transversal pillars like your capacity building, your awareness. There's also the issue of destigmatization, so all of those are kind of supportive to the main pillar of ensuring that we support the enterprises, because if we have to industrialize, we need the enterprises to set up, and we need them to have access to finance, we need them to have access to market, and we need them to be able to create the jobs that we need as a province, as a country. And those are the dots, the main dots that we're really trying to connect and put together.
This is very, very exciting news and very positive news, especially with regards to job creation. Can you maybe share with us if there's been any progress made with regards to these plans to date? So, for example, how many licensed producers are based in Gauteng, and do we expect this number to change very drastically over a short period of time?
Yes, certainly. We expect more applications. There is a growing interest in the number of enterprises, the number of conventional or traditional farmers as well, not traditional cannabis growers, but farmers who have been growing maize, and others are also inquiring on a day-to-day basis to say, how do we access and participate in the sector? So we expect more licenses to be applied for. So we in Gauteng, the country, I think overall has got more than 50 for medicinal licenses, I think, that has been issued. In Gauteng specifically, we've got 11 licenses that have been issued. We have got 29 applications that have been submitted for hemp. As you would know, that we've got 2 agencies that gives the medicinal license. One is separate to the one for hemp as an agricultural crop. So we've got 29 applications for hemp, and because of that issue of clearance, which was centralized, there was some delays in finalizing those. And now we expect that they will be finalized, because the police clearance is now decentralized. It's no longer centralized at national. And then we expect them, they would start cultivating. A number of them had research and development permits, although they came to an end sometimes in May last year. So they had already started researching and got the feel of working with the crop, with the plant, hemp planting in particular. So a lot of those, we expect that they would then be finalized, and then they would get moving in terms of their commercial activity.
Excellent, excellent. This is all very exciting news for us. I think for many of us who've been in this industry for quite some time, we're really seeing a lot of what we have envisioned and has really got us sort of really confident in terms of the future of the industry in Gauteng. So just a quick follow-up question in terms of international investors. So you have mentioned and sort of what the province is doing to attract investment and international stakeholders into the space. You have mentioned the fact that a lot of work being done to connect Gauteng to not only the rest of South Africa and the continent, but the rest of the world. What are some of the incentives that are in place now that we think could help attract international investors?
Yeah, for the international investors, firstly, our natural resources is the sun. We've got ample sun, which I think gives Gauteng and South Africa one of the edge in terms of the quality of the products that they can produce. From then an investment point of view, we've got a regulatory environment that I think it's welcoming. We've got policies that are not necessarily very prohibitive. For example, international investors can invest in land here, they can buy land. We do not have restrictions against that, or they can lease. I've spoken to the special economic zones as some of the instruments that they can set up shop in, ensure that they benefit from tax that are associated with the special economic zones. There's ample well-developed infrastructure, particularly for Gauteng. Your infrastructure, road networks, and institutions, your financial systems, they are world-class. We've got ample labor. We need them to come and create jobs. We've got very favorable market environment as well. The marketing environment is quite favorable, and access to facilities like the OR Tambo Airport, especially within Gauteng, the radius is very small. So to move products from the site to where it needs to be exported, I think from one end to the other, we have like 200 kilometers. So in terms of distance to those facilities, it's quite favorable. So it's a very favorable location, and we really want to encourage any potential investors that's looking at setting up to consider Gauteng, because it's where it's happening. It's your economic hub. We've got ample market as well for the products here, over and above abilities to help the enterprises to export their products overseas. And I've also indicated earlier on that even in terms of then research and development capacity, we've got ample institutions within the province. We've got 5 universities, big universities of the country that are based here in Gauteng, over and above the private universities that are here as well. And the same applies to institutions, laboratories, and any other support institutions to the cannabis enterprises. We've got a number of them well located in the province. It's a very good place to be.
So talking about location, and you've just touched a little bit on land, is it a requirement that an applicant for a license needs to own land or lease land at the time that an application is filed?
Not necessarily. They do not necessarily need to own. I think with the lease and the proper agreements in place, and that demonstrate access to land, and that should be adequate as a requirement, to my understanding, with the agency, particularly of SAPRA as well as DALRAT. So it's not something that should be prohibitive to potential investors at all.
Okay, excellent. And in terms of, the economic dynamics of South Africa, because I think as many people know, South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world. Obviously a very complicated history and past, but one of the core focal area of government is to address inequality. So what are some of the thinking around creating an inclusive and broad-based cannabis industry that benefits more than just certain key individuals or segments within the economy?
Yes, no, that's an important point. As you know, that inclusivity in any value chain is critical. So from a policy point of view, the policy, which is called broad-based Black economic empowerment policy, is still one of the main policies that is there for ensuring that enterprises or industrial scale are inclusive of smaller and particularly Black enterprises in the value chains. And there are a number of instruments or elements within that particular policy, which speaks to aspects of enterprise and supplier development, skills development. Ownership, obviously, it's one of the elements, and the other element then relates to management, representation in management, in boards. So those are the elements that any enterprise, whether it's a foreign enterprise investing in South Africa or a local enterprise, needs to make sure that they comply to in any of the sectors. So there are codes based on each of the economic sectors within the country, and even within the agriculture sector, there is a BEE charter for the sector. And I want to believe that the cannabis will also, to some extent, be measured against that charter as well. And as a province, what are the development initiatives we are undertaking to ensure this? So this is where the aspect of aggregation comes into the picture, where we want to support enterprises that have capabilities to aggregate smaller growers and absorb products from smaller growers and offer offtakes to the growers. And this cuts across the different segments, the hemp industrialization, the medicinal. With medicinal, we understand a lot of limitations around it, particularly from a traceability point of view and also linked to GMP requirements. But with the hemp industrialization, we see a great opportunity for much more broader inclusivity of the small growers. And that's where earlier on when I mentioned that a number of farmers are interested to grow, we tell them that one of your low-hanging fruits, if you want to enter the sector, is then the hemp for industrial purposes. Because even in terms of then your licensing requirements, it's less stringent in comparison to your medical license. And for us as a province, we would benefit more when we get the industrial products, be they cosmetics, be they fiber products, be they plastics or textile and all those range of products. So we would benefit more when we've got ample massification of biomass, but that is equally met by industrial processing capabilities. And that's where we then see the role of industrialists and offtakes and aggregators connecting the two, coming to us having an inclusive value chain that is inclusive of large scale and small scale industrialists, including of the race and color and so on. And then the other aspect, obviously, youth participation, women, and involvement in the sector are very critical points for us to always make sure that we check and measure. And that's why any enterprises that are doing business with government, those are some of the issues that are measured in terms of women ownership in the enterprises and youth participation or ownership in such enterprises. So in short, from a policy point of view, that's our instruments for ensuring inclusivity. And from a development point of view, our aggregation program linked to our hubs, the hubs that I've spoken to earlier on in the various districts of the province, would ensure that we ultimately have an inclusive cannabis industry in the province, which will also have a ripple effect on the country as well.
No, excellent. So I guess maybe just as sort of the parting question on our end is around timing. So I think, we've got, for example, the National Cannabis Master Plan, which is in process. And I think you've mentioned, the engagements that are happening at NADLAC. But what's your feel and take on timing? Obviously, I think the province is working on a provincial strategy. Do you have any insights there that I think could maybe make this even more of an exciting presentation for our listeners?
Well, on the National Master Plan, I want to believe that one could maybe expect that by towards the end of the year, we will have seen it finalized. And I'm saying so on the basis that the president in the State of the Nation address re-emphasized the significance of cannabis program industrialization. He specifically mentioned that we expect at least 130,000 jobs from industrializing cannabis. So that in itself gives the significance and elevates the importance of the sector and the need to have the plans finalized, the needs to have the relevant legislative framework enabling for that to happen. So on the national master plan, on the province, we're moving a little bit faster. We have got a provincial strategy that is now at our EXCO for approval. It has gone through the technical stages and is now at the level of our provincial cabinet, if I may use that word. We call it Provincial Executive Committee for final approval. Already a number of activities that are taking place. We are issuing adverts for potential partners in a number of areas as well that I've spoken to in line with the strategy, which addresses aspect to finance, addresses aggregation, addresses quality assurance, addresses capacity building and advocacy. So there would be adverts that will be out in the papers in the coming week and in the government gazette. So we are moving with implementation, and we expect that the momentum will pick up even at national level, such that the agency and the commitment that has been given by the president that this sector must create jobs. But for it to create jobs, there has to be visible activity, there has to be industrial activity taking place. And we anticipate that will certainly be seen as we move, as the province that is aiming to be the leader, as we move with our own activities. We anticipate that will also help drive the national or other provinces and national government to actually accelerate the work that is undertaking in terms of enabling the sector to grow our economy and contribute to the jobs that we need.
I think this has been such a robust and sort of in-depth look at not only South Africa's cannabis industry, but getting a glimpse into what the role Gauteng is going to play in commercializing this sector across the continent. And I think on that note, we'd just like to thank you so much for joining us today and sacrificing some of your time before holiday tomorrow here in South Africa, by the way, to spend a little bit of time with us and share some insights and information on the future of Gauteng and South Africa's cannabis industry. So thank you to everyone for watching and listening. Please don't forget to subscribe to our magazine, Global Cannabis Times, at globalcannabistimes.com. We actually also have a great feature with MEC for Economic Development, the Honorable Park Stow on that magazine as well. So very, very much we'll be keeping a very close eye on developments in the province and in the country. Thank you so much again.